epic.
I probably
Yeah.
should have introduced it or something.
Introduce it now. Please do.
How big was the group, and how many soloists were there, and tell us on it.
Okay. So that was from the film Joyful Noise that I scored and also arranged and produced songs for. The solos were all cast members, actors, and they were actually cast because they could act and sing, which is not always the case. But they literally were. Every actor did his or her own vocals. You heard Dolly Parton there. You heard Keke Palmer. The piece goes on. Queen Latifah kind of closes it out. So the principals were also the principals in the film. The singer, the choir members were Los Angeles SAG singers. One of whom was had never done a SAG session before. A friend, a personal friend, who, interestingly, I won't go on forever, but if you've ever been on Ventura Boulevard and seen Benning violins or Benning music, his name is Brian Benning, and he plays the violin and he does sessions. I heard him sing, and I was like, why don't you do sessions? He's incredible. So I said, you're singing on this movie, and so we worked it out so that he could join and do the session. I had 12 singers. It was it's the story of a small gospel choir in Georgia that ends up going to a competition because they're so good and they win, and this was sort of the finale, sort of a la Sister Act 2, which was another one of my films where you do these big medleys at the end. The director said, I want one of those medleys. So that's what I gave him. I had 12 singers. Gospel choirs typically don't have basses, so I had 4 sopranos, 4 altos, and 4 tenors. I was one of the 4 tenors. I think I'm one of the few composers in town who's also a SAG singer, so that's why I'm here. I straddle that fence.
And did you multi-track? You did?
We did multi-track. We did. We had, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, we all stood in a circle, and we had, soprano mic, alto mic, tenor mic. And I had planned to double because on camera we saw 11 people. I don't know why there were 11, but on camera we saw 11. We actually had 12, I'm sorry, it wasn't 11, it was more like 14 or something, like 14 or 15 that we see. I had 12 because it needed to be divisible by 3, and I had planned to double so that we would hear 24 voices. The director, who was present in all the sessions on that very first day, he says, I want another stack. I said, okay, well, that's 36 voices, and we're seeing 14. I don't care. I want it big. So that's what we did, and that precedent was set that day. He just wanted a big sound. So there were 12 singers, tripled.
Amazing. That's great. Any other comments on the actual experience of working with SAG and putting this all together? I mean, how did you go about that, specifically to do the admin side of it and everything?
Well, I'll back up just slightly and say that on this particular project, it was the production company's, this actually was this production company's first union picture. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. I just knew that similarly, another one of my movies is The Preacher's Wife. And when I was hired on that, decisions had been made before I was hired on The Preacher's Wife. And before I was hired, they had decided that to be authentic, they had to go to Georgia and find an amateur group somewhere in Georgia. It didn't occur to them, but wait, this is a Whitney Houston album. And it ultimately did not work out. And just as Bobby said, and there was money in the budget, but just as Bobby said earlier, we ended up spending a lot more money after those Georgia sessions, came back to LA, spent a lot more money replacing a lot of what was recorded in Georgia because it simply did not, it wasn't working well enough. So on this project, it was a similar thing. I mean, the story takes place at a small church in Georgia. And I was asked at the very first production meeting, well, can't you just go to Georgia and just, record some people? And I said, guys, I've been down that road, and I said, I really need pro singers. And I'm sure that there is talent in Georgia, but I wouldn't know how to find those exact voices, nor those exact musicians. I know what guitar players to call in town. I do my own keyboards. I know whom to call. I don't know any of those people in Georgia. I really, really need to do it here. Sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no. In this case, they said yes. And so I was able to stay. And so I used a couple of contractors on the film. Sally was one of two that I used on this film. And again, it's a matter of calling and saying, I need this kind of voice, I need this. And they put the groups together.
Great. This is great. Well, let's get into kind of some of the nitty-gritty of it, and then we'll get back and listen to some of Walter's work as well. Let's talk about the actual, the different kinds of agreements that there are. Perhaps Terry and Stephanie, you could speak to this. What kind of SAG agreements are available for the different kinds of media that relate to what we do?
We have agreements for just about any kind of media that is recorded. It's television, theatrical, the motion pictures, television commercials, radio commercials. Stephanie handles sound recordings. We've got a new media contract that covers things for the internet, or, even targeting cell phones, that sort of thing. Pretty much if, interactive games, which are huge right now. If you can record it, we cover it. And there's a contract that, takes into account the special needs of that particular media.
Okay. Yep.
There's also, under the industrial code, there's a side letter called the Live Entertainment Agreement. So if you're recording voices that are going to be played back in a live performance situation, like an Ice Capades or a Disney parade or those kind of events, there's a very affordable contract that you can record under that will either give you a year's use or 3 out of 5 year uses. And that's what a lot of the Disney theme parks do, and they use that contract. But it's been used for also Cirque du Soleil, and anywhere there's a live performance, but they want a technically finished track, and they want to know it's going to be the same every night. And that's a very affordable contract, too.
Right. And we're going to talk, I think, also about demo contracts. We can get into those. I think it's worth talking about. Just so we understand, how it works also on the back end. What are the back end payments, residuals, new use payments? Can we talk a little bit about that? How does that all work?
Well, if it's a theatrical film, if it's a SAG-AFTRA film, that's all. The singers become part of the cast. So you don't assume a responsibility as the composer. The studio doesn't assume any broader responsibility. If you add a 40-voice choir or 6 singers or 2 singers, then it does. Then it has the responsibility to pay anyway, because they pay a 3.6% theatrical, right? The residual, and that's divided among all the cast. So if there's a group of singers involved, the pieces just get a little smaller for everybody because there are more names. But it doesn't affect the music budget on the back end. Which
is very different from how we work with Musicians Union in many ways. I mean, so just so that everyone's clear about that, is when you have singers on the project, they are regarded as actors, and they are taken care of on the back end by the producers. And we don't have any involvement in that. They get paid. Yeah. And that's the same basically with commercials. I don't do a lot of commercial work these days, but there's a structure for residual payments that depends largely on the use of the spot, how it's used, where it's used, how wide the area is, and that all affects the back end costs. But again, I don't believe that the composer is involved with any of that. It's all the advertiser, the agency. Which is nice for us. Yeah. So what constitutes a new use? So when, this is to do with the back-end payments. Mm-hmm. If something is used again, qualified as a new use. Well, a new use would be, for instance, if you take a song that was a sound recording originally and it's put into a commercial, it has to be paid as a commercial. In that scale, in that code. If you take a song out of a film and release it on a record, there is still in place right now a conversion fee for that for singers.
as opposed to what the Musicians Union have done, and we're talking about all that. But there's a waiver that affects the cost and reduces that cost considerably from the regular sound recordings contract. A new use would be anything that's done for one media and then that's used in another. And it has to be paid at that new market area, that whatever that is, that product is, it becomes that scale.
And I would say the understanding is that when it's going to new media, new use, it's going to be earning more money anyway. There's going to be payments going out, and so this is a way of guaranteeing that the payments basically get shared out by the people who did the original recording.
Right.
So what about film soundtracks? I know there's been some work on this, and with Musicians Union and AFM, they've been able to come up with a provision for soundtracks. Can you talk about that, how it relates to our recordings?
Well, yes, I can. The Musicians Union, as probably you all know, went to a formula about 2 years ago, I think, where the 15,000 units of the film score is included in the payment for that first film scoring session. Because they were one union, they could do that. We've always been, like the film has been Screen Actors Guild, and the CD release of the score has been AFTRA, so it had to go from one contract to another. And now that we're one union, I think there's a little more working together on that. But a few years ago, we created a soundtrack waiver, which reduces the cost considerably from the sound recordings contract itself. In other words, I put a budget together the other day for something that the composer wanted to use 8 tracks from the film. And at the sound, if you translated that, they asked me to do the budget in both ways. If you were going to pay that as a record session just based on the sound recordings contract, the budget was a smallish choir, it was 16 voices, the budget came to $23,000. If you use the waiver rates, which means that you only have to time the bars that actually have vocals in them, and then you can time all those timings cumulatively, and a 4.5-minute side is what you base the rate, the cost of that's the unit of payment is side. So if you have a 20-second a vocal cue, a cue where there are 20 seconds of vocals, and then another cue where there's 45 seconds of vocals and so forth, you add all those together and divide them by 4.5 minutes, and that reduced that $23,000 budget down to about $3,200. So it's yeah, you don't have to pay for you don't have to pay for the multi-tracking under that waiver. That waiver only applies, however, to companies that are signatory labels. They can, a non-union house like a Water Tower or a Lakeshore, they can ask for a one production only, but they're limited to 3 of those, that's right. So sometimes they would want to save that for a bigger choir project.
Stephanie? Would you
And I just want to speak to that a little bit more too. As Sally said, the waiver that we have in place now greatly reduces the cost. But also, we're open to working with the community on other options that may work better. And I think not only this event, but we're happy to sit down and talk with whether it's composers or film music folks or whoever's the decision maker at that point on whether the soundtrack album gets released and the budget and all that kind of stuff. And we really want to open a dialogue on that issue because we know it's something that's kind of a sticking point out there right now. And for us, we need the information to build on.
Right.
So I'm putting that out there to everyone. If there's an issue or a situation that really is not working for you, we'd love to sit down and talk, learn where the problems are, learn where the decisions are being made, and hopefully how we can address it so it can work for everybody.
That's great. Yeah.
Can I just add one little thing about the Singers Committee? The singers in SAG-AFTRA are very hands-on because we come out of 2 big unions where we don't have a lot of representation as such. SAG was always largely actors. So and because we don't have agents, we work through vocal contractors and so forth, we really know the problems of our own workplaces, and we are a very hands-on community. And the things that we've been able to do, like the 3-hour theatrical waiver, and some years ago reducing a television call from 8 hours to 4 hours, and the CD release, the conversion waiver, and a waiver on foreign residuals for animated films. Once the cast has all been dubbed out of an animated film, you can leave the underscore voices in, and it doesn't trigger foreign residuals. And we did that because we figure maybe we lose 20% of all we might earn on a film. But if you don't do that, Disney went to London and rescored it, so we lost the whole project, or they went there in the first place. So we've tried to do those things that we've discovered along the way, just are going to make it a more welcoming place for composers and students, and studios and budgets, and so. And we're talking right now, obviously, about the CD situation. We have only talked about it on a local level, and it has to go many other places, and there needs to be research done to show that the numbers are, that it makes sense to look at that issue, but we are looking at it.
That's great. Yeah, we composers love to get our soundtracks out whenever possible.
Yeah, absolutely, we want
making
you
that
to.
affordable. Sometimes we don't get the help of even the producers to do that. Have to bankroll it ourselves. So, let's talk a little bit, Walter, about your work on Family Guy and some of these other shows. We're gonna play a little clip of something, but beforehand, would you just tell us a little bit about your experiences? I mean, you're writing. Are you using vocals both in score and in songs, or principally in songs?
Principally in songs. Usually, I get the animation script, and it has, if there's a song to be recorded, the lyrics are in the script, and I usually get to write a tune to those lyrics. Sometimes the writers on some of these shows, like Family Guy, will use an existing song and not tell me what it is, and write their own parody lyrics, and then I'll try and write a new melody to that. And part of the real fun of what I get to do is Family Guy, because there's just all kinds of music and all kinds of crazy ideas, as you'll see in a minute. What you're going to look at is a clip from an episode from a few years ago called "The Juice Is Loose." Basically, Peter Griffin meets O.J. and plays golf with him and doesn't realize the backstory. So, as this script was being animated, Seth MacFarlane thought that there was just a segment in the second act that just wasn't funny enough. So he called me up and said, I have this wild idea. I want to have the Quahog Opera Company reenact the murders on stage in an opera. I went, what? And he faxed me essentially a 2-page libretto with the lyrics, all the stage directions. He thought it all out, soup to nuts. And he said, go write it. And we need it, like Thursday. So I called Sally, as I always do, and I said, Sally, I need a classical soprano, an alto, a tenor, and a bass, and I need it by Thursday. And she came up with some absolutely wonderful singers. And so this is called the O.J. Operetta.